deepest part of the morning still clings to you, a cool density that settles deep into your bones. You are not yet fully awake, but rather suspended in the quiet space between dreams and the demands of the working day. The air here in Ostia is heavy with the smells of the sea mixed with the powerful, unmistakable tang of tanning chemicals. It's a foundational smell to your existence. Wet alum reacting with damp hide, blended with the faint, earthy sourness emanating from the storage pits where skins are cured. You draw the breath slowly through your nose, noting how that particular combination of smells feels like home, as essential and predictable as the rise and fall of the tide at the harbor mouth. You lift yourself up from the thin pallet upon which you sleep. The movement is slow, deliberate. Your joints creak softly with the cold that has seeped into the workshop overnight. You wrap your hands around a thick earthenware mug filled with water, letting the warmth bloom against your chilled skin. This moment of quiet stillness before starting the work feels almost sacramental, a small private ritual that grounds you in the routine and rhythm of survival. The first task is always tending to the fire beneath the communal stove. The coals are banked down last night, covered by ash, keeping their residual heat low but steady. You kneel beside the simple stone hearth. The movement requires a careful balance, your rough sandals shuffling against the packed earth floor. You use a long iron poker to gently stir the ashes, watching the way the embers glow, a deep, rich orange that seems to hold all the remaining darkness of the pre-dawn hours. These coals are not just for heat, they are necessary for softening certain mixtures and keeping the workspace from becoming miserably damp. As you scrape the cooled ash aside, a whisper of smoke rises, carrying with it smells far more complex than simple burning wood. There is the scent of scorched animal fat mixed with the sharpness of wet wood, the very components that define this community workshop. You find yourself observing the texture of the surrounding stone walls. They are rough, porous, absorbing moisture and the day's odors like a sponge. They have seen hundreds of dawns breaking over the port and the slow passage of countless laborers. Next, you turn your attention to the large vats where the raw skins rest submerged in brine. The water is cool, milky, and slightly alkaline. You test the liquid with a dipped finger, feeling the residual chill creep up your arm. These pits are vital, containing the early stages of preparation, soaking the toughest hides until they yield properly. You inspect the stacked piles of materials waiting to be worked. Thick slabs of goat skin intended for sandals, paler pieces of calf skin meant for fine riding equipment or purse straps, and rougher sections of oxhide destined for structural work. The sheer variety of these incoming goods speaks volumes about Ostia's role in the empire. You notice the differences immediately, even blind to labels. The tautness of a recently shed animal's hide versus the softer, more supple give of something handled gently by nature or by man. Each piece tells a story, a journey from some farmstead outside the walls, carried down through countless miles of Roman roads, eventually arriving here at this beating heart of commerce. Your mind drifts briefly to the sourcing of these materials. You consider the merchants who brought them in. They must have traversed long distances, navigating barges laden with goods from Gaul or Syria, their cargo taking up space right alongside your own tanning pits. Your craft is not just about stitching. It is about participation in a vast, necessary supply chain that only this great port could support. With the basic materials observed and the heat source tended to, the next necessity is cleaning your implements. You move to a simple wooden bench where an array of tools awaits. These tools are extensions of your hands' blades, awls, chisels, and shears. They must be perfect before they meet the hide. You pick up the main cutting chisel. The metal feels cool against your fingertips, bearing the subtle patina of years of use. You take a piece of stiff linen cloth soaked in water and begin scraping away dried residue from the blade's edge. There is a controlled scrape, a careful friction that removes microscopic bits of leather dust accumulated overnight. You observe the geometry of the tool, its clean edges, the balance point designed for minimum effort, maximum cut. The ritualistic act of cleaning sharpens your mind, forcing you to focus on minute textures and precise motions. Next are the stitching awls, thin bone implements used to punch holes through the leather. You dip them into a small basin of brine and give each one a careful wipe down. They are deceptively simple tools, yet they require a specific smoothness for repeated use. As you handle them, you feel the weight of expectation. These tools represent your skill, passed down perhaps by your father or uncle, and perfected over years of practice. You arrange everything back on its designated spot. The small sharpening whetstone beside the chisels, the orderly row of awls, the spools of waxed linen thread, colored earth tones chosen specifically to contrast pleasingly with different types of hide. Everything has a place, following a pattern that guides your movements and minimizes waste. As you settle in to begin the actual labor, there is a slight increase in ambient sound. It is not yet the clamor of the busy market, but the hushed murmurs of neighbors waking up. A nearby stall owner is beginning to sweep dust from the pavement. A rhythmic thudding suggests someone carting goods further down the street. These gentle sounds weave together, forming the soundtrack of an awakening city that has woken slowly and deliberately around your small corner. You select today's primary piece, a few supple sheets of middle-quality calfskin earmarked for various minor repairs, requiring careful trimming and stitching. You lay it out on a large, worn wooden table. The skin has absorbed the damp chill of the early morning, lending it a cool resistance beneath your palms. You trace over its surface with one finger, feeling for any irregularities, a small scar, a patch where the grain is weak, a variation in color that might indicate poor curing. This tactile inspection is always the first step, an assessment of worth and suitability. You spend several minutes simply observing this single piece of leather. You note how the faint staining from the nearby refuse bins, the accumulated residue of Roman life, seems to have permeated the porous surface unevenly. It gives the material a certain history, refusing to be merely new. This patina is part of its enduring value, and you reflect that every visible flaw, every stretch mark or crease, contributes to the lived quality of both the material and your labor. The warmth begins to creep into the workshop from the gradually strengthening sun, finally managing to push away some of the persistent damp chill. The light struggles through the oiled parchment window, casting weak, angled beams that illuminate dust motes dancing in the air, a visible manifestation of the city's life and industry. You feel the subtle weight of accumulated expectation, the orders awaiting completion, the demands of the quartermaster, the need to keep your own family provided for. The sensory details become overwhelmingly important now. The scent changes slightly as the early smoke dissipates. You can now distinguish the smell of dried dung from the nearby stalls, mingling with the industrial tang of alum. It is a complex bouquet, utterly unique to this confluence of human activity and commerce by the Tiber's furthest reach. You take a deep breath, feeling the accumulated rhythm of the morning wash over your consciousness. This methodical repetition, cleaning, organizing, examining, preparing, is more than just preparation. It is an act of mental centering. It prepares you not just for physical labor, but for the focused concentration required to sustain yourself throughout the demanding hours ahead. The gentle ache in your shoulders as you prepare your tools seems a welcome sign of potential work, a promise of routine fulfillment. The weak, gray light has finally begun to bleed through the oiled parchment window, casting elongated shapes onto the earthen floor. You do not need bright light yet. Your hands know what they must find in this subtle transition of dawn. Your first action is a simple one: cleaning. The air still carries that heavy perfume of curing alum and damp tannin from last night's residue. But you know you must make room for today's work. You move to the corner where your collection of tools rests. They are extensions of your own life, polished by sweat and necessity. The focus narrows entirely onto their readiness. You pick up a cutting chisel first. It feels cool and dense in your palm, its wooden handle smooth from countless grips. You run a soft cloth over the blade, checking for any dullness or deep rust patches that might have sprung up overnight. The scraping sound as you run a fine stone across the edge is quiet, almost imperceptible, but it speaks of preparedness. This small ritual of sharpening is more than just maintenance. It is an acknowledgement of your skill and its sustained necessity. Next are the awls. You gather them together, noticing the subtle variations in their points, some for delicate stitching, meant for soft calfskin, others with thicker tips designed to pierce the dense hide, intended for military gear. Each one has a distinct purpose, reflecting the geometry of what you intend to build. You dip the points into a basin of clean water and wipe away any clinging particles of dried leather grease or fine tannin dust. The water is cool against your skin, bringing a brief moment of stillness. The workshop itself requires attention. Your workspace is an organized chaos, defined by tiers of raw materials. Near one wall, stack bolts of webbing made from bleached linen. Opposite them, the immense, partially cured hides await their destiny. You pause near the racks of incoming leather. This is where your gaze naturally lingers, tracing the journey etched into the surfaces of these skins. Some are the rich, fine ivory tones you know belong to merchant calfskin, the kind favored for elaborate purse straps and decorative sandals. These pieces arrived perhaps on a cart from Gaul or even further afield, having been treated by experts in peripheral markets before reaching Ostia. Others are rougher, darker goat or sheep hides, clearly destined for the sturdy, utilitarian boots and shoes required by legionaries passing through the port. You run your fingertips over the grain of one particularly good piece of kidskin. The surface is almost oily to the touch, a smooth resistance that speaks of recent, careful tanning. You breathe in deeply, drawing in a complex scent, the faint metallic sharpness of alum mingling with the earthy sweetness of plant-derived tannins, and the unmistakable smell of stored sea salt from the nearby harbor, a constant undercurrent of your daily life. The sheer variety is overwhelming if you pause to consider it fully. Each hide tells a story of geography, use, and value. This scrap might have originally been part of an animal grazed on sun-baked plains near Brundisium. That piece might come from local Iberian sources. You understand, with the quiet certainty of professional experience, that the type of skin determines the tool you must use, and in turn dictates the eventual form of the object, the practical stability of a soldier's foot, or the delicate flourish of a merchant's possession. Shifting your attention back to your tools, you find a small pile of waxed thread. You select the correct thickness, noticing how the material changes slightly depending on whether it is meant for an internal structural seam or a decorative external lacing. The wax coating makes the threads glide smoothly through the all points, promising a clean passage. A faint, weak sunlight finally manages to penetrate deeper into the shop, catching motes of fine dust and tiny scraps of dried leather near your feet. This light reveals the texture of time in the space, a patina of labor that is both comforting and demanding. You carefully wipe down your workbench, using a damp cloth stained with alum solution. The smell shifts slightly as the mixture dries, sharper now, more mineral. You take a moment to simply sit near your stool, your hands resting on your knees. Your mind does not rush ahead to the stitching, but instead settles into the readiness that precedes all work. You observe the rhythm of your own breathing, deep, even, and slow. This steady internal pace mirrors the necessary methodical nature of the task at hand. Everything you handle today, the knife edge, the precise thread tension, the chosen piece of skin, demands a centered, deliberate quietude. The raw materials rest before you, the pristine potential waiting to become functional objects. The piles of hides, stacked according to type and quality, seem almost like silent, patient observers of your morning ritual. You straighten a stack of small pieces needed for minor repairs, a replacement buckle tab, or a quick fix strap end. These small tasks require no grand journey or deep thought, just an immediate, focused application of practiced ability. This preparation phase is fundamentally about control. Controlling the blade's edge, controlling the thread's tension, and controlling your own concentration against the background hum of Ostia's massive commercial machine. It is a meditation conducted in the quiet corners of commerce. You anticipate the first stitch, not with eagerness, but with a deep understanding of rhythm, the necessary cadence that will define the hours ahead. The air, though still cool from the pre-dawn hours, seems to hold a subtle increase in warmth. It is not the sun's heat yet, but the rising breath of many bodies gathering in the narrow workshop area. You feel the slight shift in the communal atmosphere as your neighbors begin their own quiet preparations nearby. The scent that characterizes this time, a mix of stale smoke, damp earth, and the complex tang of curing hides, is beginning to layer itself with the sharper, cleaner odor of sweat and warmed oil. You settle yourself down onto a low bench near your workbench, where the remnants of last night's work rest beneath a thin sheet of dust-covered wood. Before the deep commitment of stitching begins, there is always this necessary settling in, a transition from the solitary focus of preparation to the communal rhythm of industry. Your eyes drift over the layout of the workshop. Stacks of cured hides waiting for treatment, neat rows of specialized tools resting in wooden caddies, and the central area where the vats containing the tanning liquids are positioned. You pause to simply observe the organized chaos, noting how every object has its designated place, a physical manifestation of order necessary to handle such diverse raw materials. The faint sounds start softly, like distant water lapping against stone in the harbor, or perhaps the rhythmic shuffle of feet on packed earth outside. These background noises are the true timekeepers of Ostia Antiqua. They remind you that even as you prepare to work on something meant for immediate sale and use within these city walls, the vast ocean continues its timeless cycle just beyond the port entrance. You reach out a hand, not to grasp a tool, but simply to feel the surface of the workbench. It is cool under your fingertips, carrying the memory of countless hours spent pressing against it, the resistance of stretched calf skin, the slick give of freshly cleaned oilwood, the fine grit of ground bone. This tactile connection grounds you in the reality of this place. Your attention moves to a small basket filled with prepared thread and awls. The threads are waxed linen, dyed in muted but reliable colors, a rich ochre for military belts, a deep crimson reserved for patrician goods. You select one particular piece of goat skin destined for sandals. It lies folded on the workbench, having already undergone its initial scraping treatment. Running your fingers over its surface, you can detect the subtle difference between this hide and the richer patch of calfskin stored nearby. The goat leather feels more utilitarian, slightly stiffer, bearing the natural resilience needed to withstand the dusty routine of a marching soldier's life. You think briefly about the journeys these skins must endure before they ever reach your hands, from where the animal was raised, through the slaughterhouse, and finally to this specialized basin of curing alum and tannin in Ostia. That journey is an enormous logistical feat, orchestrated by men far removed from the steady rhythm of your needle. You pick up a bone awl, testing its weight and ensuring the point remains sharp enough for deep work. The metal has been cleaned thoroughly since yesterday, now bearing only the slight patina of industrious use. You imagine the precise motions that must be coordinated with this tool, the gentle push, the satisfying resistance of passing through densely packed fibers, and the clean drag backward. It is a skill born not in reading or debate, but in repetitive, disciplined motion. The awl represents the geometry of labor. It requires accuracy, trust, and a deep understanding of material stress. You examine your own hands, calloused and etched with the faint scars of years spent working near sharp implements. They are tools themselves, capable and marked by necessity. The sounds begin to coalesce around you now. There is the measured scrape from another artisan working deeper in the shadows, possibly shaping a piece of wooden harness gear. Nearer still, you hear the soft, clinking sound, the sound of brass buckles being tested, or perhaps the tapping of bone against stone. These are not distracting noises, they are markers, signaling that the workday is actively gathering momentum. They form an acoustic blanket over your bench, a continuous reminder that you are part of something larger than just yourself. You pick up the leather piece for the sandals again. The pattern marking drawn on it was simple but critical, the lines dictating where the primary stress points would occur and where the stitches needed to be strongest. You run your thumb over the pre-drawn chalk line, feeling the faint roughness of the treated hide fibers beneath the protective layer of grime that no amount of cleaning can fully erase. The routine is a meditative thing. When you commit to stitching, everything else, the massive docks humming with trade, the whispers of politics in Rome itself, recedes into the background. There is only the point, the thread, and the yielding resistance of the skin. The first few stitches are almost ceremonial, slow by design. You gather the waxed linen thread through the awl-eye. The action must be deliberate, measured to ensure the perfect tension. As you draw the awl back through the leather, there is a crisp, satisfying sound, the signature sound of perfectly executed craft. It is the audible punctuation mark of reliable labor. This gentle rhythm immediately begins to reset your internal clock, quieting any scattered thoughts that accumulated during the long watches of preparation and anticipation. You focus on the pattern. The stitch lines must be parallel, spaced exactly as required for the strength and comfort of a man's foot under a soldier's boot. Each puncture point is a small calculation involving distance, force, and the specific tensile strength of the goat hide. You are not merely tying knots into leather. You are constructing durability, engineering resilience against the rigors of Roman military life. The act itself becomes deeply absorbing, drawing your entire attention into the micromechanics happening just inches from your eyes. Observing the neighbor working on his bench across the way, the movements of his hands are almost synchronized with yours. He picks up a thicker piece of oxhide and begins his own rhythm. The two rhythms, distinct in their materials and slight variations in pace, merge into a gentle chorus that defines this corner of Ostia. It is a mutual acknowledgement of shared purpose, a comfortable silence built upon the understanding that everyone present here depends on the successful completion of the task immediately before them. The smell of leather dust seems to intertwine with the faint scent of wood smoke wafting in from an open cooking brazier nearby, grounding you further in this specific moment and place. You begin to settle into the groove of the repetition, pulling the thread through, guiding the awl just so, puncturing, pulling, stitching. The world outside your circle, the shouted greetings of porters, the calls of fishmongers setting up their stalls, becomes a distant, muted backdrop. There is only the steady pull of the thread and the predictable drag of bone through resilient material. It is in this pure, repetitive motion that you find not just work, but a specific kind of quiet fulfillment, a rhythm that matches the deep, undeniable heartbeat of the city itself. The early hours, the scent of alum and curing tannins, has become the background music to your life. The routine established by the rhythmic scrape of bone against hide is deeply ingrained, a familiar rhythm that governs your movements before the sun even considers rising. You continue your work on the rows of calfskin straps and the overlapping pattern of goat leather sandals. The labor is not merely physical. It demands a quiet concentration that settles deep into your muscles, slowing the frantic pace of thought until only the immediate act remains. Thread through eye, needle drawing taut, perfect arc left to right. You feel the smooth give of the stretched calfskin beneath your fingertips. It is softer than yesterday's tougher kidskin used for merchant luggage, a difference you recognize immediately by its slightly cooler temperature and barely there resistance. You pause the stitching motion, resting your hands on the pile of partially completed goods simply to observe the material. The leather reflects the weak light filtering into the workshop from the oiled parchment window, a dull sheen that catches your eye for a moment before the grime and fine dust settle back over it. Your gaze moves past the work itself, down to the narrow wooden stall where fresh loaves of bread sit, cooled by the humid air. Next to them is a modest wooden basin, catching rainwater mixed with yesterday's cleaning runoff. These simple elements, the raw material, the meager fuel, the basic provisions, define the taste of your routine life in Ostia Antiqua. It tastes of tannin and warmed flour. As you take a needed break from the repetitive motion, you reach for the hard cheese wrapped in a damp leaf. The cheese has developed a slightly pungent smell overnight, mixed with the earthy scent of salt, a good sign that it hasn't yet molded too far into an undesirable state. You carefully carve off a piece with your small knife and place it on a chipped ceramic plate. Beside the bread, you pour a thin stream of watered wine into your own simple wooden cup. The liquid is barely enough to wet the throat, but carries the deep minerality of the local earth. You sit back against the rough woven bench, letting your shoulders drop away from the continuous tension required by the stitching motion. The quiet sounds around you become more distinct now that you are not actively focused on stitching. You hear the soft clatter as a neighbor across the shared space moves something heavy, perhaps a crate of finished goods awaiting transport to the harbor. There is a muffled, rhythmic thudding sound, suggesting another worker engaged in similar physical labor nearby. You break off a piece of bread and take a slow bite. The crust offers a satisfying resistance before yielding to the soft, slightly dry interior crumb. You chew slowly, letting the mild taste mingle with the saltiness of the cheese. It is food that sustains utility over pleasure. Every element was chosen for its lasting effect on your energy and focus. The process of sustenance becomes less about feeding hunger and more about maintaining a steady state of being, a controlled rhythm matching the slow, dependable pulse of Ostia itself. You watch how the light changes imperceptibly in the workshop corner. The weak dawn sun has been replaced by a stronger, warmer luminosity that feels like it comes from overhead, filtering through the dust-laden air and catching small motes of leather particulate matter suspended near the ceiling. This break forces your thoughts away from the geometry of stitching, the precise overlap of one thread upon another, and toward the larger currents of life. You notice a discarded piece of goat skin near your bench, rough and unevenly colored. It looks like it was destined for some robust military boot, or perhaps a cart harness. The contrast to the smooth calfskin you are working on is striking. One demands disciplined uniformity The other allows for minor imperfections that only enhance its perceived toughness. This sudden comparison of materials draws your mind outward, toward the port visible only in memory and discussion. Ostia is not just a collection of workshops, it is an economic nexus point where the needs of the legions meet the desires of the wealthy citizen. The very material you handle, the hide, has traveled hundreds, perhaps thousands, of kilometers. It came from some animal grazed on fields that are not yours, subjected to processes and diets far removed from your own bench. The quiet exchange with your neighbor also anchors this reflection. Though few words are exchanged, the glances pass back and forth over the small plates of food, a shared acknowledgement of mutual dependence. You might hear a snippet of conversation drifting in from the street outside, perhaps referencing goods arriving from Gaul or shipments of specialized dyestuffs needed for richer hues. These little fragments weave together the economic reality that underpins your simple act of stitching. It is this constant interplay between the local and the distant that defines life here. Your mastery of a common craft, sewing straps, forming sandals, is inextricably linked to the global trade network passing through the bay. You are a small part of a vast machine, and your required skill gives you a quiet but absolute necessity. The remaining meal is consumed with slow consideration. You use the time not just to rest the muscles in your hands, but to let your mind settle into a state of observant calm. You might gently clean any visible dust from your tools, the little chisels and awls that helped guide the stitches hours ago. The metal feels cool and faintly greasy under your thumb. Their cleanliness is a physical mirror of your own careful, disciplined existence. As you finish, the small satisfaction of having temporarily nourished both body and mind settles over you. There is no grand epiphany or sudden burst of dramatic realization, merely the quiet knowledge that you are equipped, fed, and ready to recommence the measured rhythm of creation. The scent of the drying hides begins again to dominate your senses, mixing now with the subtle sweetness of day-old bread and the faint steam rising from the slightly cooler ambient air, a perfect taste of routine. You finish the last row of stitching, your fingers feeling a gentle ache that speaks only of honest labor. The tough scent of cured goat hide and fresh alum settles around you, a familiar anchor point in the vastness of Ostia Antiqua. You push back from your low wooden bench, brushing grit and fine leather dust from your tunic. A subtle shift in air current brings with it not just the smell of curing skins, but the far more complex aroma of the port itself, a blend of saltwater tang, exotic spices carried on foreign wind, and the smoke of cooking fires from distant kitchens. The routine of the workshop holds you for a moment, grounding you. Your eyes adjust slightly as your gaze shifts away from the tightly packed tools and ordered vats. You step out of the immediate confines of your stall and move toward the narrow thoroughfare that runs parallel to the main docks. The air here is different, carrying the weight of things that have traveled great distances. You walk slowly, deliberately, letting your senses calibrate to the shift in environment. Your path takes you near a cluster of loading sheds, built simply from wood and rough Roman brick. Here, the scent of leather gives way to something sharp and earthy. The smell of freshly hauled timber, wet rope fibers, and perhaps dried fish laid out on woven mats. The docks are alive with movement that is less dramatic than it is constant, a flow, an organic tide of activity dictated by the steady lifeblood of Rome itself. You observe men moving goods, their movements economical and practiced from years of labor. Some are wrestling large bundles wrapped in coarse canvas. Others are simply securing timbers to waiting barges. The noise surrounding you changes too. The muffled rhythmic scraping and occasional thudding within your workshop is replaced by a more complex soundscape. The creak of heavy wooden axles, the shouted warnings of dock workers hauling ropes, and the occasional clatter of pottery being stacked high on pallets. You find yourself stopping near the edge of the main quayside. The water itself reflects the hazy Roman sky, a sheet of pale blue mixed with gray dust stirred up by passing ships' wake. It is a wide view, vast enough to make your small workshop feel contained and sheltered. The trade here is immense, constantly flowing like the tide. You watch crates stacked high against the supporting columns. Some are labeled with unfamiliar scripts, hinting at Gaul, or perhaps as far east as Syria. Others hold goods that speak of immediate Mediterranean life, amphorae filled with local oil, rough bales of Sicilian grain, and small sacks of peppercorns. Your mind naturally begins to map these materials onto your own craft. You look at the bundles of rough timber, and you think of how durable leather must be to match it, tough enough for a soldier's gear that faces harsh climates and difficult terrain. You observe crates filled with bright textiles, the deep reds or dusty indigos, and consider the straps needed to keep such valuable goods secure. The way they are folded and protected. There is a particular stall where merchants arrange stacks of semi-finished items. You see rolls of rope made from flax fibers, massive bolts of dyed cloth, and sometimes, strangely enough, fresh pieces of exotic hide that have only just arrived skins, unlike any you usually handle, perhaps from a wilder beast or a very distant market. The variety overwhelms the local scale of your work. You remember the precise dimensions needed for a pair of caligae, an object so simple, yet dependent on a raw material that completed its journey thousands of miles away via ship and river, passing through this same monumental port. You spend several minutes simply watching the cycles of unloading. A team of men hauls in a heavy net, perhaps filled with small catches of fish or netted vegetables. and the way they maneuver it requires careful coordination and strong rope attachments. You note how the strength required for these tasks translates into the very leather you work with every day. The hide must be robust, resilient, dependable. The sun has climbed higher now, warming the dust motes that float lazily over the rough paving stones. Your initial sense of displacement begins to settle back into a calm observation. You are a node in this gigantic system. The spices and textiles passing through the port do not directly enter your stall, but they dictate the rhythm, the demand, and the specific types of raw goods you must accept and transform. You trace an imaginary line from one stack of imported grain to another, connecting it mentally to the merchant who will use that grain, buy those sandals, and walk them through the streets constructed with timber hauled in on those ships. Your life is threaded into this massive economic tapestry, unseen but absolutely necessary. The air changes slightly as a cart laden with fragrant spices passes by cardamom or perhaps cinnamon bark. The sweet, sharp smell briefly masks the perpetual metallic tang of salt and animal waste that underpins all port existence. It is a reminder that even in this essential, grimy space of labor, there is always the promise of something rare, something far away, brought here to sustain life. Eventually, the steady tide of passers-by begins to draw you back toward the relative shelter of your workshop street. Your focus slowly narrows again, shifting from the monumental scale of the port docks to the manageable geometry of your own humble life and craft. You feel a quiet satisfaction, not just in what you make with leather, but in knowing that the entire vast machine of the Roman world, its spices, its grain, its timber, its soldiers marching far away, is temporarily channeled through this single, small act. The stitching of one durable piece of material, ready to endure another great journey. The raw, smoky scent of curing hides still clings to your tunic, a familiar weight that has become the very fabric of your daily life. You have spent the morning working with the sturdy, serviceable goat skins, the kind meant for troop sandals and practical gear, a material whose history is measured in miles walked and mud endured. But now, as you turn your attention back to your bench, a different pile of goods awaits. Smooth strips of calfskin gleaming faintly under the diffused light that filters through the oiled parchment screen. These are not skins for a soldier's journey. These are designed for men who remain seated, maneuvering within the marble confines of wealth and patronage. They belong to merchants, the patricians whose fortunes rise and fall with the tides carried up from Ostia's great docks. You select a sheet of this lighter hide, running your fingers over its surface. It feels different under your touch, less rugged, more finely polished. You lay the calfskin flat on the work table, giving it room to breathe, allowing you to see every subtle variation in grain and tone. There is a deep resonance in this material, a quiet luxury. You observe how the light catches the natural sheen of the finished hide, remembering that its value lies not merely in its thickness, but in its flawless texture. Its acquisition whispers of faraway markets, of goods traded alongside spices and fine timber. It speaks of an empire's wealth funneling through this very port. Today's task is to fashion a belt and the corresponding closure for a merchant's purse, a small accessory that must carry an immense amount of importance. The strap needs to be rigid enough to hold its shape when filled with denarii or papyri scrolls, yet supple enough that it does not irritate the skin beneath fine woolen toga. You reach for your specialized tools. These are different from the heavy chisels used for cutting military boots. These require a surgeon's precision, small awls, finer scalpels, and razor-sharp stitching needles. The metallic scent of the freshly polished iron blends with the ever-present earthy aroma of alum and tannin, creating that unique atmosphere of your workshop. You begin by scoring the strap. This is not a forceful action. It is a mindful, controlled drawing of the blade, just deep enough to guide the stitch through the layers, without slicing through the usable material underneath. You move slowly along the designated lines, visualizing the completed object in your hands, a piece of functional artistry. The rhythmic sound of the scraping metal against the dense hide surface creates a gentle counterpoint to the distant murmuring noises of the city waking up. It is a controlled sound, an internal rhythm set by your own measured movements. You notice how concentrated this work requires you to be. Your focus narrows entirely onto the strip of leather. Nothing else matters. The cries from the streets outside, the ache in your lower back, even the need for a drink. There is only the line being followed and the integrity of the material beneath your fingertips. The contrast between yesterday's labor and today's task becomes vivid in this moment. The heavy goat skin demanded brute consistency. Each stitch was equally placed to bear the weight of a man marching. This calfskin demands artistry. Every curve must be graceful, every connection seamless, because its owner will present it publicly, an extension of his own status. You remember passing by the docks earlier, seeing crates bearing goods that would eventually adorn such a purse, the fine imported dyes, the expensive metals used to reinforce these very straps. You take a moment to examine the closure mechanism. It is not merely leather. It involves small pieces of bronzed fittings, intricate little plaques meant to secure the opening. You handle them carefully, noting the subtle patina built up by age and moisture. The artisan who crafted this metalwork must have understood metallurgy on an equally deep level, treating bronze as if it were a living material itself. It is a conversation between materials. Tough hide speaking to delicate metal, both bound by your meticulous skill. The stitching continues, moving methodically down the length of the strap. The thread spun from natural fiber and dyed rich ochre catches the light in short segments as you pull it through the prepared holes. There is an almost meditative quality to this constant action. You are counting not just stitches, but passing time itself by their steady placement. Each repetition acts like a slow breath, grounding your awareness within the tangible reality of the workshop. Your mind drifts briefly to the owner of this purse, a man whose life revolves around ledgers and transactions. He will dip his hands in salt water or olive oil, smelling only money, ambition, and fine perfumes. The craftsmanship you impart is meant to support that carefully curated facade of success. You feel a quiet satisfaction in knowing that your disciplined labor lends structure to someone else's complex life. The purse holds not just coin, but the man's reputation. When the main stitching is complete, your hands pause, feeling the slight stiffness in the tendons that have been moving constantly for hours. You reach out and gently brush away a stray piece of leather dust from the finished strap. The material feels taut, finished, perfectly ready to receive its ornate fittings. You admire the clean geometry of it, the way the soft curve of the hide contrasts with the hard edges of the bronze. It is an object designed for permanence, meant to last many seasons and bear witness to countless transactions. You do not rush this final step. Instead, you test the finished strap with your fingers, flexing it gently back and forth. You observe the integrity of the line from beginning to end. The overall sense of accomplishment settles around you, a low, steady warmth that competes only with the slight heat rising from the communal hearth in the corner. You know that the small details, the perfect alignment of the stitching, the chosen shade of thread, the careful finishing edge, are what separate mere survival goods from works of art. They are proof not just of your skill, but of the necessary refinement required to sustain life in this magnificent, demanding city. At its heart, the intense heat of the midday sun presses down on your shoulders, a solid weight that forces you to slow your movements. The rhythmic clatter and low murmur of work have been building all morning, contained within the close walls of the workshop. But now, that pause feels like an interruption to something much larger, the breathing pulse of Ostia itself. You decide to step out briefly, drawn by a sense of quietude that seems necessary before you can continue stitching another stitch. You walk away from your bench, leaving the scent of hot leather and lamp oil behind you. The heat immediately hits differently outside, drier, but more encompassing. Your bare feet feel the worn paving stones beneath them. They are cool in spots where the sun has not yet reached fully. You move toward the open basin area near the corner of the workshop structure, finding a patch of stone that is slightly shaded by an awning, or perhaps simply cooler to the touch. Instead of immediately resuming your task, you simply stand and allow your body to absorb the sudden shift in atmosphere. The sounds of the port are still audible, filtering through the dense crowd like notes from a distant instrument. The creak of ropes being pulled taut, the occasional shouted direction in Latin or Greek, the rolling call of a vendor's cart passing near the main road. You watch the children playing nearby. They move with an unpredictable energy that contrasts sharply with the measured pace of commerce and craft around them. Their shouts are high and bright, punctuated by the dull thud of an unseen ball hitting the packed earth. You observe how easily they seem to exist outside the framework of work. Their game requires nothing but immediate space and momentum. The air smells complex now, a blend carried on the slight breeze. Dust mixed with salt from the nearby Tiber, the sharp tang of cooking spices from a stall further down, and underlying it all, the deep, earthy musk that always clings to your life, the smell of animal hide, cured and settled into your bones. You notice the pattern in the flow of people. There is a steady, meandering current through the main thoroughfares. Some citizens walk with great purpose, their sandals scuffed and worn from crossing many leagues. Others move with the leisurely pace of those who have simply finished a meal or are discussing news overheard at a tavern. You let your gaze settle on the architecture around you. The buildings press close together, walls built of brick and stucco that seem to absorb and redistribute the daylight. You trace the lines of chipped paint and carved stonework, details left by generations of hands before yours, all speaking of necessary life and continued habitation. These structures have seen trade booms and declines, periods of quiet settlement, and now you occupy a small niche within their constant rhythm. The simple act of pausing allows your thoughts to slow, mirroring the slower pace of the midday street scene. You think about the material itself, the hide awaiting transformation on your bench. How much journey does it take for this thin piece of calfskin, perhaps from an ox butchered far beyond Ostia's immediate vicinity? It must have been dried, salted, traded up a river, or along a coastal track, and then delivered to this bustling port. This material has survived immense distances and many hands. You consider the invisible life cycle woven into your job, taking something once living through a skilled sequence of chemical treatments and disciplined manual labor, transforming it into an object that serves another human's routine. A purse strap holds coins, a sandal supports weight, a sturdy belt defines an officer's station. You are reminded that the simple necessity of these objects is what gives your existence its quiet security. The wealth visible in Ostia often relates to items carried by men, spices, silks, scented resins, but you work on the things that allow those men to carry them and move through life. The containers, the supports, the fasteners. The heat continues its slow ascent. A woman passes nearby, carrying a basket woven from reeds. She pauses for a moment, perhaps anticipating a greeting or simply needing to steady her pace. You notice how gracefully even this mundane act appears when viewed in the fullness of daylight. The careful balance required to move through crowded spaces with an object. The movement is efficient, uncomplaining, and deeply routine. You feel the subtle, familiar itch of concentration returning to your fingertips. Your mind begins to wander from the vastness of the city back to the intimate curve of the tools on your bench. The observation period naturally wanes. The work calls you back in its demanding quietude. You take one last, deep breath, drawing in the mixed perfumes, the dry dust, the sharp scent of tannins still clinging to the air, and the underlying smell of human activity. The communal quietude has given way once more to a specific focus. You turn back toward your bench, allowing the subtle, thrumming energy of the city around you to provide an unconscious backdrop. Your hands begin to move slowly again, adjusting a discarded piece of trimming waste, settling into the measured rhythm that defines your steady, necessary place in the heart of Ostia. The sun has begun its long, slow descent over the roofs of Ostia. The intensity of the midday heat is finally beginning to yield, replaced by a softer warmth that settles lightly on your skin. You notice the gradual change in the quality of the light. It is less a brilliant white and more a deep, dusty gold, skimming across the curved tiles and worn stones of the workshops. It signals the winding down of labor, a gentle permission to slow your movements. The first task you take on is clearing the immediate evidence of the day's work. You systematically gather the waste materials, scraps of discarded leather that are too small for stitching, but still possess inherent texture, slivers of cut hide stacked neatly near the edge of your workbench, lengths of thread that have frayed or snapped during the repetitive motions of the afternoon. There is a methodical calm to this gathering. You sweep the fine dust of tanned animal matter from the stone floor into a corner, watching the beige powder mix with the grit and dust kicked up by passing sandals all day. The scent here is complex now, a changing aroma that carries the fading notes of brine mixed with cured alum, overlaid by the earthy musk of wet dirt being tracked in from the street outside. You begin the cleaning process with your tools. Each instrument requires its dedicated attention. You pick up the heavy bone chisel, running a damp cloth over its worn surface, removing the remnants of tough stitching line that have hardened into grime. The metal feels cool beneath your touch, a satisfying contrast to the residual warmth trapped in the stone bench. Next, you take the awls, those small piercing tools. They require careful attention. You wash them gently in the shallow basin of water mixed with fine ash until they gleam faintly under the waning light. The rhythm of cleaning is slow and deliberate. It is not merely hygiene. It is an act of respect for the instruments that allow you to exist, that translate raw material into functional object. Each cleaned tool feels ready for a future use, promising reliability when tomorrow's demands arrive. Once your hand implements are clean, you turn your attention to the inventory. This means more than just counting. It is an understanding of what resources you have available and where they came from. You gather all the remaining pieces of leather, the remnants that were not usable for stitching, but which still hold potential value. You sort them by type: smooth calfskin, perfect for linings or decorative accents; durable goat hide, suitable for more exposed straps or buckles; and perhaps a few larger scraps of ox hide, destined for simple padding. As you arrange these sorted piles, your eyes fall upon the materials as a reflection of Ostia's sprawling economic network. This small pile of calfskin, which feels almost silken against your fingertips, did not come from within the city walls. It traveled across continents, perhaps having been handled by sailors who tasted salt spray and exotic spices days before it reached this workshop. The durable goatskin likely came through Gaul, requiring strong hands to bring it up the Via Ostiensis. This constant stream of materials forces a continuous state of readiness in your mind. You are not simply stitching. You are participating in a vast, slow-moving economic current that begins with livestock grazing far beyond the sightlines of the Tiber and ends as a finished product in the hands of a wealthy trader or a passing legionary. The workshop space itself requires tidying. You fold up the large sheets of protective canvas that covered certain sections of the bench top, tucking them away precisely so they do not become tripping hazards. You wipe down the communal work table, noticing the patina, the blend of faint oil stains, dried tannins, and years of scraping marks that tell a silent story of successful mornings past. You organize the small ledgers or writing tablets where you keep track of the day's production figures. This simple administrative task is as necessary to your livelihood as the sharpest knife. It confirms that effort expended equals sustenance earned. You count out any remaining thread spools and check the quality of the dye batches, ensuring the colors used for stitching are still vibrant and strong. The settling dusk deepens the atmosphere inside the workshop. The sounds outside grow more distinct now. The distant calls of vendors setting up their stalls for the evening market, the rhythmic creak of wooden cartwheels turning slowly on cobblestones, and the murmur of voices moving homeward after a long day. These background noises create a soft curtain between your focused work area and the busy life of the city. You take a moment to simply breathe in the ambient scent of the closed workshop. It is no longer dominated by fresh, potent tanning smells. It is softer now, mellowed. You notice the lingering smell of cedar smoke mixed with old leather, a blend that feels characteristic, deeply belonging only to this place and this time of day. This final inventory, this quiet reckoning with what remains at the close of the workday, settles a gentle sense of completion over you. It is confirmation that today's rhythm was maintained, that your hands kept their necessary motion, and that, by the sheer effort of repetition and care, sustenance for tomorrow has been assured. You gather nothing but the knowledge of having skilled labor expended and materials accounted for, preparing to let the quiet routine of evening envelop you, knowing that only with this careful ending can the next cycle begin its ascent. The last of the afternoon light slants into the workshop, painting stripes across the dusty floorboards. You finish brushing away the final fragments of dried hide, dust from your small workbench. The rhythmic scrape of the brush against the stone feels surprisingly loud now that the main tasks are done, a sound marking the slowing pace of the day. You pause, letting your breathing settle back into its natural rhythm, noticing how the deep ache in your wrists and back has settled like a comforting weight. It is not an acute pain, but the familiar burden of a life spent curved over benchwork. You lift your hand, turning it over slowly, examining the slight ingrained roughness that comes from years of contact with curing oils and rough tools. This simple examination is a deep act of acknowledgement for the day's labor. You turn your attention to the small pile of cured hides waiting nearby. They are separated by type, the smoother sheen of calfskin reserved for finer straps, lying next to the tougher, earthier texture of goatskin meant for sandals and accoutrements. Each skin tells a story through its grain, where it was taken from, what kind of animal it belongs to, and how long it has spent in the cool, damp darkness near the tanning pits. You run your fingertips lightly over the surface of a bolt of reddish hide. You can feel the residue of tannins still clinging faintly, mingling with the fainter scent of alum, a blend unique to this quarter of Ostia Antiqua. It is not merely inventorying materials, it is quietly measuring the day's economy. You think back through the hours, the swift, practiced movements required for the delicate curves of a purse belt, followed by the steady, unyielding pull needed to form a row of military caligae. These materials, these sheets of reformed animal life, are not just local goods. They represent an immense journey. The goatskin might have come from flocks raised far beyond the visible city walls, and the calfskin may have been carried in on ships that arrived through the mouth of the Tiber weeks ago. Having crossed seas you could only hear told by sailors' tales. You settle onto the low wooden bench near your workspace, letting your back find a momentary rest. The smells of the workshop begin to soften as the intense heat of the day gives way to the cooler air of evening. The sharp bite of curing salts and wet hide mixes now with the faint, earthy scent of wood smoke drifting in from nearby hearths, the scent of life drawing its warmth inward for the night. Your mind drifts gently toward the quiet importance of your craft. People might walk past today, wrapped up in their own routines, passing you by without a glance, barely noticing the arrangement of tools or the careful stacking of hides. Yet, they rely upon what you make. The merchant who carries his valuables requires a strong strap. The legionary needs durable footwear to protect his feet on dusty roads. Even the family simply needing a sturdy purse for market purchases depends on your skill. Your necessity is interwoven into the very fabric of Ostia's bustling life. You close your eyes briefly, feeling the subtle thrumming pulse beneath the surface noise of the city, the muted sounds of distant voices, the occasional clatter of pottery being moved deeper in the neighborhood. This constant, underlying movement reminds you that nothing here is static. Everything is perpetually moving, exchanging, or traveling. Thought turns to the concept of time itself. In this workshop, time seems measurable not by the sun's arc, but by the density of the work required. The hours are marked by sharp knots tied into leather and neat rows of stitching, passing through durable material. You find a quiet satisfaction in that physical accounting. The day's rhythm has been predictable. Prepare, labor, pause, clean. This predictability is a deeply comforting thing, a dependable structure against the vast unpredictability of empires and global trade. You gather a small coil of unused thread, its color faded slightly by exposure to the air. You trace the pattern on the worn wood bench with your finger, feeling the grooves left by countless elbows and discarded tools over generations of artisans before you. This connection to those who worked here before is palpable. It's in the smell of old oil mixed with tannin, in the smooth flatness of a tool that has been passed down, in the way the dust settles only on objects routinely handled. The weight of necessity settles not as a burden, but as a warm, steady knowledge, knowing that these simple straps and sturdy shoes are required, that they make life possible for others, brings with it a calm certainty. You are a crucial cog in this enormous mechanical beast called Roman existence. Your labor matters, not because it is grand or visible, like the legions marching through the forum, but precisely because of its reliable, understated essentiality. As true dusk begins to settle over the port city, the sounds change again. The raucous calls of market sellers give way to the softer murmur of dinner preparation and quiet domestic conversation. You rise slowly from the bench, your muscles protesting gently, but accepting the resistance. Your last action for the day is to wipe down the cutting edge of your favorite chisel one final time with a damp cloth. The metal gleams dull in the low light, promising readiness for the cycle that awaits tomorrow. You organize the small tools back into their wooden rack, making sure every awl and chisel rests perfectly within its defined space. Everything has found its place, awaiting the inevitable return of dawn's soft illumination. The day's work has done its steady, demanding pace. The scent of alum and tannin, which has been the constant undercurrent to your waking hours, begins to soften as evening fully settles over Ostia. You finally push back from the scarred wooden bench where your stitching tools rest, feeling the familiar ache in your lower back that is now simply part of you. There is a sense of deep, quiet satisfaction that settles into your shoulders, the knowledge that today's necessities were met. That structure was provided for both the soldier's boot and the merchant's satchel. You do not leave the workshop yet. The routine of closing down requires certain final touches. You collect the smaller items first, the slivers of bone awl, the hardened tips of the cutting chisels, stacking them with care in their wooden box. Each tool has absorbed sweat and fat and dust, and smells of cured hide, a history etched into its surface as you wipe away the last residue on the steel blades, noting their dull sheen against the deepening shadows. You consider how deeply these small instruments are woven into the fabric of your existence. They demand respect, constant sharpening, and routine cleansing. They do not forgive neglect. A slow, thoughtful hand movement leads you to the scrap bin. You begin sorting the remnants of today's labor. A sliver of fine calfskin marked for stitching on a wealthy citizen's belt, separated from a larger patch of rough goatskin that might be suitable for inner lining. The systematic process is soothing, allowing your mind to settle into its natural rhythm, like the quiet click of scales being sorted by color and material. You mentally catalog what remains, enough scraps to last through tomorrow's small repairs, enough bulk remaining to satisfy any immediate commissions. You move toward the back corner, where a small communal hearth is kept warm for cooking coals, although its smoke smell is entirely different from the harsh, chemical smells of tanning nearby. The transition in scent is distinct. Instead of brine and acidic alum, the air now carries the gentle, smoky aroma of olive wood ash mingled with burning coals. This shift marks the closing chapter of labor. You walk towards the small dwelling attached to the workshop, your home. The door creaks softly, a sound that feels deeply personal and private compared to the large echoing sounds of the port beyond. Inside, the space is simple. Packed earth floors, rough wooden furniture, and low, beamed ceilings. The evening routine begins with preparation for supper. You gather kindling and arrange it carefully near a small brazier. The task requires slow, careful movements, stacking wood pieces to allow the flames to catch evenly, generating just enough heat to be comfortable without being overwhelming. As you tend this fire, watching the tiny sparks rise and fade into the smoky gloom, you feel the cool dusk air on your skin, a refreshing counterpoint to the humid warmth of the tannery that has dominated the day. The small meal is simple. Flatbread, warmed by the oven, paired with a soft, pungent cheese, and perhaps a cup of watered wine. You sit cross-legged on a low mat near the brazier. The eating itself is an unhurried affair, requiring no conversation or grand gesture, simply the satisfaction of solid sustenance, grounding you in the moment. You observe the way the light from the fire catches the dust motes dancing above your plate, tiny, golden particles suspended in the evening air. This small domestic tableau feels impossibly peaceful after hours spent immersed in raw materials and repetitive labor. After consuming the meal, the natural instinct is to mend or to tend to something. You pick up your tunic, the simple woven woolen garment you wear daily, and notice a small tear near the cuff of your forearm, perhaps from a stray piece of rough material or an accidental scrape on a working bench. The mending becomes your focus, drawing a slender needle through the worn fabric, pulling the thread tight, and knotting it with methodical care. The process slows you down entirely. The tension required in the tiny movements brings all other thoughts into sharp relief. As you stitch this small piece of cloth whole again, your mind drifts naturally to reflection. You contemplate the concept of structure, the way a single thread can hold together a massive bolt of leather for a merchant's goods, just as the stitching mends your simple tunic. Everything requires its point of support, whether it is calfskin supporting a patrician's status or a needle supporting your continued existence. You rise from the mat and take a slow turn around the small room. You run your hand along the rough-hewn wall and examine the geometry of your simple life. The low ceiling, the earthen floor, the corner where the coals burn. These materials, the earth, the wood, the woven fibers, are all things that must be worked, shaped, or maintained to achieve function. Nothing remains pristine or untouched here. The sounds of the night begin to filter in from beyond your immediate haven. Not the industrial clatter of the port, which has quieted down now, but softer rhythms, the muffled laugh of children playing a distant game, the lowing call of an animal settling for the night, the occasional rhythmic shuffle of footsteps belonging to a neighbor passing by on their way home. These sounds are merely part of the city's exhale. You settle back onto your mat, the soft heat from the embers still radiating upward, warming your feet and comforting the tired muscles in your legs. You close your eyes, not as an act of forcing rest, but rather allowing yourself to sink into the accumulated weariness of a good day's skilled labor. Before true sleep takes hold, you perform one last sensory anchoring ritual. You take a deep breath, drawing in the composite smell of the evening, the clean, faint smoke from the brazier mix, with the lingering scent of curing leather that always clings to your clothes, a complex perfume of tannins and dust. This mingled odor is your signature, the scent map of your life in Ostia. It is comforting, familiar, and completely yours. You let your thoughts slow down to match the gentle hiss and crackle of the dying embers. There are no great dramatic currents tonight, only the steady pull toward rest. You simply settle into the quiet weight of survival and skilled craft, allowing your consciousness to drift away on the rhythm of the deepest breaths, preparing yourself for the scent-laden cycle